And I just want to say, like, how did you kind of foresee political comedy being such a big thing for the network and for the future of comedy in general?
Well, I will say this: it's hard to take credit for political comedy um, because political comedy was a big part of the comedy landscape in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, these may not be names that you know, but Mort Sahl was a comedian. He was a political comic in the 60s who was very well known, very famous. And there were plenty of political comics around, just really doing some pretty heavy stuff about politics. They were stand-up comics. And then there were some shows, that were sort of vaguely politically funny oriented on, around, but nothing like what we had been doing. But the whole idea of doing political comedy or doing comedy about politics or current events, well, that wasn't ours. We knew we had to get into it. And the question was, what are we going to do that's different? So the first thing we did, really, and you mentioned Bill Maher, politically incorrect. He came to us. He actually pitched me and somebody else, the guy I was working with, a guy named Mitch Semmel. He pitched us in a diner, and he said, "Look, I want to do a talk show about real issues, and I want to do a talk show where people actually talk about real issues, and not just about their movie or their book or the other things people talk about on a talk show. I want to get into the issues. I want to put people on the spot. I want to go up to the line. I want to cross the line and get into trouble. Mm-hmm. And I want to call it politically incorrect, and that's what it's going to be." And we bought the thing on the spot. We just said, "Yeah, great." Because nobody was doing that at the time. That was just not going on anywhere. We didn't know too much about Bill Maher, but again, we were young and crazy. We didn't even know if we had enough money to do that show. But we said yes, and we put Bill on the air. And once again, I will say the first 6 months of his show was, I wouldn't say a disaster, but it wasn't good. But he found his footing. He found a producer he'd like to work with, and it became really good. And then of course the rest is pretty much history. I mean, Bill Maher's been doing a version of that show for his entire career.
It's all I've ever known, Mass, basically.
Yeah. Sorry?
It's basically all I've ever known him as is that.
Yeah, right, exactly. He hadn't done much before. He was a stand-up comedy. He'd done a movie, and but he was not really known before. And the fact of the matter is, it's amazing that he's made this his career. He did get in a lot of trouble a couple of times. He got fired. He went to ABC, I think. They stole him away from Comedy Central. As I said, anybody good, they took him away. And then he got fired there because he screwed something up, and the advertisers got really upset. So he went to HBO. They rescued him.
And I guess, the State of the Union address, that was something that never had really been done. You had to pull a lot of strings to get that live feed of the State of the Union so you could kind of, talk about it, but in an irreverent way, in the only way that Comedy Central would.
Yeah, you gotta remember, this was like in the early 90s, and Comedy Central was like the upstart wise guy. Like the other channels didn't really think that much of us. Not that it mattered that much most of the time, but we had this idea that we would cover the State of the Union address that the president gave. He gives it once a year to Congress. We would cover it live, and we'd have comedians in front of the screen, commenting on the president's State of the Union address live while he was giving it. And everybody's like, "Yeah, that sounds great," So we said, okay, now we just have to go get the feed, because we have to be one of the television channels that's allowed to show it. And we were pretty stupid. So we thought anybody could, all you had to do is raise your hand and you'd get it. It turns out that one channel, and I think it was CNN, was allowed to be the guys covering it, and they were allowed to tell who got the feed. And basically the rule was, if you were a bona fide news organization, like, ABC, NBC, CBS, those guys, Fox, any real news organization got the feed, no questions asked. And so we walk in as Comedy Central, say, "Yeah, we want the feed too." And it was like, "No, you cannot have the feed. What are you, crazy?" And that was a bigger fight than I expected it to be. I think I say this in the book, I don't actually know who came to our rescue. I think somebody somewhere at the top of some monolithic entertainment company said, just give him the feed, just do it. And CNN said, okay, we'll give him the feed. But it wasn't CNN who said, we'll give you the feed. Everybody was against it there, and everybody was against it through the rest of the news industry. They didn't want to see it made fun of. They knew we were going to do it. Anyway, we did it. Al Franken was the first guy to do it. He was the first comedian. Al Franken went on. He
right?
He became a senator. He was a writer and performer at Saturday Night Live at the time. So we were lucky to get him. And we had worked with him a little bit on some other stuff. So it was really fun. It was really, and I will say that was a benchmark. That was really kind of a moment for me, because the next day the reviews came out on that thing, and people suddenly said, we were getting like, hey, these guys at comedy are really kind of doing some interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, people had said that before, but this was kind of like a little breakthrough for us, and we were really proud. And that's what started us on our way to doing, we covered the Republican and the Democratic conventions, and we also covered, every year the State of the Union address, some other stuff. Jon Stewart, by the way, was involved in that early stuff as well for us. And that, you can draw a direct line from that to The Daily Show. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. And like I said, you guys weren't the first for political comedy, but when I was saying the rise of political comedy, I was mentioning like kind of like this stuff, this kind of got the younger generation kind of to pay attention to politics in a way that they never would have before, that I never would have before, like The Daily Show and Colbert Report. That got me actually watching, social commentary and social issues that were happening in a way that you wouldn't turn to a news channel as a kid and just sit there and watch it.
I think of all the accomplishments of Comedy Central, that has to rank as one of the top.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit unexpected. I mean, the idea that we were going to do political comedy seemed obvious in so many ways. But what happened, which is the younger generation suddenly tuned in with interest and started reporting almost immediately that they got most of their news from Jon Stewart. That was like, I left around that time or shortly thereafter, but that was the big surprise to everybody. That's what
it turned into.
What happened. And you know what? You got to hand it to Jon Stewart. You got to say he was so much of the success of that, and so much of the reason that show worked that way, at the beginning. So credit him, because
it was brilliant. I thought it was definitely, like you said, one of the benchmark moments to be able to reach the younger generation like that in a way that so unexpected.
Yeah.
To be what it is. Then there was also the Dennis Miller situation that you talk about in the book also.
Yeah.
He takes his chance at State of the Union undressed with Bill Clinton. And this one runs a little bit long, and he has some issues that happen.
Yeah. And the issue was, since it went long, he had to go to the bathroom. And he was the only guy on screen, and he couldn't really just leave to go to the bathroom. So it was live. And you got to love live television or live everything, live radio. And I spent a little time in the book going through some of the crazy stuff that happened through the years in live television, because a lot of crazy stuff would happen. But that was the crazy stuff that happened when I was there. And I was physically there, and Dennis Miller came out. He left the studio and he had his mic on, but he had to go to the bathroom, and there was no bathroom nearby. So he just went into a nearby garbage can that was in the hallway, and then went back and did the rest of the State of the Union address. It was one of the most unpredictable, great moments of Comedy Central history, I think. And the really funny part was it was not unnoticed by the audience, but nobody said, "Oh my God, what's he doing?" It was just kind of like, "Oh yeah, this is Comedy Central." This kind of stuff. I guess.
That must be a bit, yeah.
But the thing is, Dennis came running out afterwards thinking he'd killed his career. I mean, he was really distraught. And he came out and he ran into the bathroom, and, I tell the whole story. Of course, he didn't kill his career, and it was all fine.